Hello, and welcome back to the Friday Vinyl Club, where it's all right, I'll block out. God, this is hard. Right. Hello, and welcome back to the Friday Vinyl Club, where every day feels like Friday and every record tells a story. I'm Jamie, and this is our Artist Spotlight, the series where we spend time with one artist or band. We dive into the music, the memories, the moments wrapped around them. Each episode, a guest joins us to talk about their personal connection to the artist, how they discovered them, how the albums landed across different chapters of their life, and which record they would submit into Friday Vinyl Club as their definitive pick. Today, I'm joined by my boy Ollie, and we're in Newcastle for a couple of days to see one of our musical heroes, Loyle Carner, perform. So, Ollie, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be back, everybody.
We're going to talk about Loyle Carner today, but for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to call him Ben.
Yeah.
Because obviously Ben's his real name, Loyle is his stage name, and every time I'm talking about him, I default to Ben, you default to Loyle, so it's easy for me if we just call him Ben. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I don't think Ben would mind.
Sounds good.
All right. So let's get into it. Today's featured artist is Ben, aka Loyle Carner. You introduced me to Ben's music a few years ago now. So let's rewind a bit. How did Ben's music come into your life? It was quite a pivotal time for you, wasn't it?
I think, like a lot of people, the way I came across his music was Yesterday's Gone. Tracks like Florence did really, really well. It got a lot of play, especially when I was back in high school. And then I think from there, did a little bit of a deep dive into that album. Tracks like Miss C really resonated. And it was just around the time he was releasing Not Waving But Drowning, which I think was the album that for us was really capturing for us, really brought us in.
And that was around the time that we at Mama and Papa were starting to have a little bit of empty nest syndrome because you'd gone off to Manchester, you'd gone off to uni. I really started listening at that point. And again, when we talk about our Papa and Ollie musical relationship, it's another artist that you've introduced me to that over the years has really, really stuck. And actually, I've become as big a fan of Ben as you are really now. We really enjoy that. So once you had your attention, what was different about Ben's music between you swiping and hearing a track and moving on versus to where we are now all these years later?
Yeah, I think a big thing for us and connection-wise has always been his lyricism. Even in Yesterday's Gone, a lot of the songs get you moving, a lot of the songs get you dancing. He's had tracks in FIFA and never fails to get a crowd moving. But there's always a song that you can connect to on a personal level. And again, on Not Waving But Drowning, I think that's followed through. So I think for us, and for me especially, that's been a big thing that's kept us around, but also just his style, his songwriting, the instrumentals and things like that. Always been a big fan of.
I think one of the biggest things for me was the human side. Listening to his first album, Yesterday's Gone, and then into the second album, themes about his friends, themes about his family. Family, obviously, a really, really big part in Ben's life. And it comes through in his music. But then, when we've seen him live, which we'll go on to now, some of his live shows have been utterly inspiring, from the really, really tender moments to the kind of mosh pit bounce type thing that I slowly started to get used to. Your first Loyle live gig was in 2019, so you'd come back from uni in Manchester to Leeds to meet me, and we went up to the gig together. We managed to get down the barrier. What are your memories of that first gig? Do you remember it?
So the album came out in April. I started university in September of 2019. So we'd both had a lot of opportunity to get familiar with a lot of the tracks on the album. There's a really beautiful sort of poem written by his mum, which ends the album. And similarly, there's one at the start, which he dedicates to his mum, which is all about him moving out of the house, obviously in different circumstances. He's talking about moving in with a partner, but the words rang true for us, especially of me moving out, me moving to university, first time living alone and away from home. So the album felt like a really good bookmark of what was going on in my life. So the opportunity to see him live in the was it the September?
I think it was around that time. We met up in Leeds City Centre. I remember I was queuing, doing the dad queue, waiting for you to arrive, and then you turned up, and
Yeah.
we got through the queue. We got onto barrier. We were not dead centre, but we were down just, I think, to the left of stage in that O2 Academy in Leeds. And it was a phenomenal night. I remember the energy that came off stage, the energy from the crowd. You were absolutely in your element, clinging on to be making sure that nothing bad happened to your old man. And my memories from that gig were mainly seeing Loyle really enjoy himself, but seeing you absolutely in your element as well, because it was like you'd found your place. We've been to lots of music concerts together, but this was really you guiding me through this one rather than the other way around at that time. And I think that was really special. We managed to catch him afterwards, didn't we? And he kindly signed a couple of vinyls for us, and it was really special.
So he's always been very generous with his time whenever we've been fortunate enough to see him. And I think, as Dad said, one of the things that does keep you coming back is obviously the energy when he's on stage. He puts on a very good show, but also he's just a very nice guy. And I think it's fair to say that you don't always get that when you go to a concert. Someone could put on a great show, but, not really want to interact or stick around outside of that, which is totally fair. But it's been very nice for us. And we've been fortunate to have that with a few different artists, But it is something I think is rare, especially nowadays.
There's definitely a massive connection between Ben and his crowds, and we've seen that grow and evolve over the years as well, which has been really, really nice. Because if we go back to that Leeds gig, and when that was our entry point, you then saw him a couple of days later. You went to Manchester, didn't you? He was playing. Was it the Academy he was playing?
Yeah, it was one of the university academies, I think. So Manchester University has 3 small O2 Academy rooms, and he was playing in one of those. And again, really, really good show, really great atmosphere. Probably my first solo show, definitely my first solo show in Manchester. And again, an amazing experience.
Yeah, and I think, talking about Manchester is quite pivotal with Ben's music, because you're in Manchester, you're at university now. We have that empty nest syndrome at home. I mentioned that earlier, but at that time, COVID is just starting to bubble up, and the fears around, you being away at university, COVID hitting, places getting locked down. During that early time, while you were still on campus, music was a bit of a bridge. We were really investing in Not Waving But Drowning, the album.
Yeah.
I was listening to a lot at home, thinking of you being over there. You were obviously listening. And whenever we connected, we were chatting about the tracks on there. And we'll go into that album in a little while. But the actual bonding, and me as your papa getting more involved and listening to the lyrics and understanding what Ben was trying to articulate through those tracks, was quite a special time. And we've gone on to see him a number of times. We've seen him tiny little venues, the Belgrave in Leeds. He'd just done Wembley Arena. He'd just done this huge show for Hugo, which was his third album. And then, he's humble enough a couple of weeks later to rock up at a celebratory gig for this little tiny venue in Leeds. What do you remember about that one? Because we'd been to a couple of Hugo shows, hadn't we, before that, in Nottingham and Liverpool, I think it was. We met some really cool people there in the queues as well, some really nice guys. But do you remember much about those little Leeds gigs? We did 2 nights back to back.
Yeah, I think they felt a bit like a throwback to his earlier shows because of how small the venue was and the stage was. But I remember again getting there, being with you down at the front, and the energy just being the same. The room was so much smaller than these venues he'd been playing, and the venues he's gone on to play, but still he puts on that same show, you know, regardless of if there's 200 people or 2,000 people in the room, he always brings the energy.
Mm. And then we were really, really lucky, weren't we? We got to see him at the Royal Albert Hall in London to reimagine that Hugo album. Obviously, by that time, Ben's pretty popular. We've seen the crowds grow over the years. And by that time, I drove us down to London, and we dropped our bags in a one of the most dodgiest hotels I think I've ever had the misfortune in staying in. And then we managed to get to the Royal Albert Hall, thinking that there'd be queues round the block. And actually, we were one of the first people in the queue that day. But it soon built. There was such camaraderie in the queue. Making friends with people, chatting about people's memories. And you actually got talking to somebody from his record company that day, didn't you? A guy who was asking you a little bit about your thoughts about Loyle and how you found his music.
Yeah, there was a brief conversation we had with, must have been like a strategist, but it was a fun experience to give insights. There was a load of fans that he chatted to that day. But the gig itself was obviously the main highlight of that trip down.
Yeah, and absolutely. When we were down front watching that all unfold, what are your memories of that particular Royal Albert gig? I mean, it was his birthday as well, wasn't it? So it was a double celebration, but it was so spectacular.
I think it was really just amazing to hear the album slightly reimagined. Obviously, you had some strings there. You had Finn, who obviously plays the piano in the current shows, had a full grand piano, and a lot of the endings of the tracks when they were played at the Albert Hall had improvisation by him. And I think it's actually gone on now. Obviously, it was recorded and pressed and has been published. Is one of some of the tracks are, in my opinion, better than that original Hugo when it came out. There's just so much more energy in the live tracks, and having been there as well, obviously they hold a little bit more of a connection from us.
And then we watched him grow even further from that perspective, haven't we? So he played Glastonbury recently. I think he was on the other stage, headlining and showcasing his new album, hopefully, which we'll talk about in a bit. But managing to make that look so intimate was just stunning to watch, wasn't it? I mean, we were blown away by the way that he set that stage up, the way that he played around with the visuals, the cameras to draw people in. So he didn't necessarily have to project himself. He could just be himself. There's so much vulnerability around that set. And it went down in a storm, didn't it? Got some real critical acclaim. And, his co-producer and musical influence, Avi Barath, I think had a huge say in that. And all the musical direction and the way he sets up his live stage now in the Hopefully tour. We've just seen 2 concerts, haven't we? We went over to, lucky enough to see him in Amsterdam recently, which was absolutely stunning. And then first night in Newcastle, which just blew us away, really. What are your thoughts on how things are set up at the moment and that Glastonbury gig?
In terms of how the stages are set?
Yeah, just, how do you think it comes across? How do the new songs land?
I think it's evolved with him. Obviously the topics he touches on are still quite similar to things in his earlier album, just more from the perspective of him now having children. He's a parent and trying to navigate that landscape, but there's definitely a tonal shift or a shift in the vibe of the music. The songs are still relatively upbeat, but they're not designed to, and he said this himself at the shows, hasn't he? They're not designed to get the crowd like bouncing.
Yeah.
It's just trying to get people present and just enjoying
being in the moment. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the work that his team does around that, setting stages and all the ecosystem around him outside of the music, like putting all the live shows together, or whenever he does a talk or a pop-up or anything like that, the production around it seems to follow that. It's been a lot more, not laid back in a lazy way, but just more relaxed, more like family orientated in a way.
Yeah. And I think Ben becoming a father and having 2 kids now, I can certainly resonate with some of the themes on this particular album, hopefully, and we'll talk about that in a second, because we'll wander through the albums now. We'll just talk about, you know, how the albums hit us, what our memories of them are, and we'll go through them in chronological order. So, like, Yesterday's Gone came out in 2017. You've touched on a couple of things on that, but do you have any specific tracks on that album that stick with you?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few tracks on that first album that, looking back on it now, are big standouts. Obviously, the really popular tracks are Ain't Nothing Changed and Damselfly, but I've always been a big fan of Mean It in the Morning and Plus 44, which is almost like a short poem that he's put on the album. And I think that's one thing I really liked about the album is you go very quickly from things that are quite mellow and laid back to things that get you up on your feet. But what about you?
From my perspective, on that particular album, Ain't Nothing Changed was one of the tracks when we were at that first gig in Leeds that absolutely stuck with me. And obviously people were bouncing around to that, and Ben was, big smile on his face when he was singing that. And over the time that we've seen him and the gigs we've seen him in, that seems to have become a bit of an anthem for him. And I'd like to think from a distance, for what we see, Ben, when we first met him, to Ben now, yes, things have changed in his life, whether that's materialistically, financially, or with his family. But he just seems so humble. And when he sings "Ain't Nothing Changed," I like to think he's saying, look, it's still me. I'm still Ben. Ain't nothing changed.
Yeah.
So that one absolutely jumps out on me from that particular album. But the next album we're going to talk about, Not Waving But Drowning, I think is probably one that for me had a bigger impact. And again, going back to you being away, us listening to it during those COVID times, and then that being the album that kind of followed us into our live experiences with that. So which songs connect or jump out at you?
Yeah, I mean, Ice Water is always fun live. Everyone is always singing along. You've got tracks like Still, which I think Ben refers to as one of his favourites. And I know for us, it's less of a song, but Dear Ben has a connection for the three of us. But I think the album as a whole is probably my favourite of the albums he's released. Even going back, and listening to it now, I think 5 years on, it still hits the same, still a great album.
And for me, I think, there's a couple of tracks on here. I always like Loose Ends.
Yeah.
I think that's an absolutely beautiful track. And again, live, that's pretty much a staple in that.
Yeah.
Still, as you mentioned, one of Papa's favourite tracks, that one, I absolutely adore that. But you were moving out, and as you mentioned, Dear Jean was the song that he wrote to his mum about him moving out of the house, and that really resonated from us as you move out of the house. But then that absolutely beautiful poem track at the end by Ben's mum, Dear Ben, I think you put that on a little video compilation of a load of family pictures for us one time after you'd moved into your student digs. You were playing around, being a bit creative. Sat me and your mum down, and that was playing over the top of it. And I'm actually getting quite emotional thinking about that now, because it was such a big moment in our family triangle life. But the words in that song, his mum created an absolutely beautiful moment. So yeah, from that particular album, those are the tracks that I would potentially pull out. So that came out in 2019. Obviously, there was COVID in the middle of that, and by the time he came out with Hugo, which was around 2022. Life was getting back to normal. We were back gigging. We were going up and down the country. I remember we went to an album launch for this. We were supposed to see him for a signing session, but he was a little bit under the weather. But he managed to pull himself around for the evening show, which was quite special for me because he'd signed our vinyls and he spotted you in the crowd and he'd come over and given you a fist bump that night as well, which, as a proud papa stood next to you was a phenomenal moment at that time. What are your thoughts on Hugo? There's a lot of different themes on this one, and he said himself he was going into different territories and exploring aspects and areas of his life that he potentially had shied away from before. What were your initial thoughts on Hugo?
Yeah, it definitely feels like a much more serious album. The topics that he covers. I think initially it did feel like a bit of a departure from what we were used to. I think Yesterday's Gone and Not Waving But Drowning just cover completely different times in his life. They do have a similar sound to them.
Yeah.
Which I think resonates between those two albums. And I think Hugo is the first time that there's a bit of a departure from that. Still a lot of the same elements, but definitely different topics. It feels like a different vibe to the album, especially when it was live. You really got a different sense for the music. I think a big one for me was Homerton when I first heard that. That was also the track that put me onto Olivia Dean. She features on that as a vocalist. I think A Lasting Place as well was a really standout track for me on that one. But the album, and especially hearing it live and the live version, has definitely grown to become one of our favourites.
Mm. And I think, from my perspective, Homerton's the one, yes, that's our entry point into Olivia Dean, but that's the one at the end of the track
With his dad.
where it's like there's sometimes the parents need the child more than the child needs the parent.
Yeah.
And that's never a truer statement has ever been said, right? That little piece on that song, so I carry that with me because it's such a truth. And then, from my perspective out of that album, Nobody Knows, absolutely love that.
Yeah.
I've loved that from the moment that I first heard that, and that energy on that song live.
Gets you very excited.
Absolutely. It's safe to say that's one of Papa's favourites. I also love Speed of Plight on that.
Yeah.
Is the world moving fast for you as well? I can tell you, Ben, it's not just you. And the older you get, the world seems to spin a lot faster. But, the themes on this particular album resonate with me. I mean, Ben and I have had very different upbringings and we've experienced very different things, but I can resonate with him from his father connection. His dad left him when he was young and he got a stepdad. I had the same path. My dad left me when I was young. I had a stepdad. I guess, the slight difference in Ben's journey is that he reconnected with his real dad and he's had that opportunity to put that piece right. And sadly, from my perspective, that never happened. I was never able to connect with my real dad, and he died before I was ever of a mindset to even want to connect with him. So I can see a lot of healing for Ben on this particular album. And I can resonate with obviously not all of it, but I can resonate certainly with some of it. And then talking about resonating with his albums, Hopefully came out a few weeks ago, and we've been intently listening to this on vinyl once we got our copies, and we'll come on to the variants of vinyls in a second. What are your thoughts on Hopefully? It's a very laid back, more relaxed style. It feels more fragile, this one, right, versus Hugo. It seems to have gone in another direction. What are your thoughts on this one?
I think, as you say, it sounds so different from anything he's put out before. And I think at first when it came out, you attribute that to, he's a father, he's got his 2 kids now, and this feels a lot more like music they could connect to. And I know in his live show, yesterday he mentioned that they were on tour whilst they were recording this, and sometimes his kids would come with him on tour, and whenever they had a moment, they would try to record some tracks. And he found that his kids enjoyed being in the studio, whether it's, sitting next to Finn or Avi whilst they played something. So I think a lot of that energy definitely comes through on the album. I think for a lot of people, it might have been a surprise because he sings on the album. It almost, you know, if you didn't know what Ben sounded like, you could say it's a different artist, but it's actually grown very quickly to be an album we really enjoy. We had it on in the den when it was a little bit warmer, and we just sat out in the summer. We would listen to the album. I'm a big fan of the acoustic guitar that he's brought into some of the songs on the album. Lying for Us and About Time are probably my favorite tracks, and he plays those live and the crowd gets behind him, sings along. But I think again, it's allows people to connect with him because he doesn't really seem to be, at least when the album came out, like he wasn't sold on the idea of singing himself. I think it came about because he'd wanted someone to sing the songs and they weren't available, so then he had to sing them himself. And he's very happy to be vulnerable on stage and admit that.
I think it's incredible. I think the step from an artist perspective, I think that has really seen Ben really grow to another level because it's very fragile. It is very vulnerable. He is vulnerable when he's singing on stage. He openly admits that. But I think what that then does is it brings that empathy out of the audience and it connects even more because you're willing him on, you're wanting him to do well. There's so much love in the room when he's singing. But yeah, Lion is a beautiful track. That's a Papa and Ollie favourite. We've already had a conversation around that. But I also like the more up-tempo Horcrux. Am I saying that right? Horcrux, yeah. I really like that track. And I love seeing and hearing that one live. But in my mind as well, is another really, really beautiful track. So that was a rundown of Hopefully, and that was a rundown of all the albums. We've collected all the variants. Are we collecting too many variants nowadays? Because every album, whether it's Ben or anybody else, they seem to come out with probably 4 or 5 variants from an album perspective. I got you all of the Hopefully variants, for example, for your birthday, which were, I think we had 6.
I can quite comfortably cut you off here and say, yes. This will now become a broadcasted intervention pod. We love, variants of vinyl. And I think it's always quite nice now when something isn't just pressed in black. There's a lot of older stuff that is pressed in black that you like to get because there's no reissues or anything like that. But I think because vinyls have become more popular now, it's amazing to be able to pick up, as we've said in the past, liquid filled or different colors, and you can put so much into a pattern now on a vinyl or a gradient on a vinyl. I'm of the mindset because I have a player now in my flat. We have our main setup at home. I think we do max 2, unless there's really a reason.
Just 2?
I think max 2.
Oh, but you say that, and then we said that about Olivia Dean. We said that about Hopefully, but then Blood Records drops a beautiful one, or the artist drops a picture disc, or they drop a beautiful color, and then it's like candy in a sweet shop.
It is, but I think that's why there's quite a nice idea of being intentional with it. If you think when you were first collecting vinyl,
you'd only get one.
You'd only get one.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we need to make an idea of seeing all of the releases. Obviously, it's harder now because some things are released earlier than others and they sell out. But maybe if we narrow it down to 2, one for me, one for you, and we go about it that way. I know for Olivia Dean, we'd done that. I'd got the alt cover.
We didn't.
And
We ended up getting 4 variants for Olivia
yes,
Dean.
but this is because of Mum.
Yeah, I know.
Initially, we just had 2, and she decided to buy the rest, which we're very, very grateful for. But I think, as amazing as it is, and as lucky we are to be able to get that many, you only end up playing
one at a time
anyway. So I think we stick to 2.
And you've heard it here first. It's on the Friday Vinyl Club podcast. It's an exclusive. My boy's parenting the parent and telling me we have to slow down on vinyl variant collecting. Will it last? Will it last? I'm not so sure, but we'll see. Talk to us about the artwork on the different albums. There's definitely, Yesterday's Gone. He's got his family and friends on there, and then he progresses over the different albums. Is there any particular one that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, obviously, for those that haven't seen the cover, is a photo of him and his son sort of drawn over the photo. And I think that's quite fun, really sums up the album and the feel of the album. I think the Not Waving But Drowning photo is quite an iconic cover. If you ask most people which of his album art stands out the most. So I think for me, it's a tie between those 2.
Yeah. Do you remember we kind of recreated that? We were in the sea. I can't remember where we were, but we were side by side, waving back at your mum on shore, trying to recreate that.
I think it was more of a coincidence, wasn't it?
No, well, you might say it was
coincidence.
coincidence. I would say it was intentional. As your dad, I've got to think about these things, and we've got a lovely photograph of us. And if you put it side by side, that Not Waving But Drowning album cover, I think it's a pretty good effort, if I do say so myself.
Yeah.
All right, the big question, son. Which of these albums are we submitting into the Friday Vinyl Club? So we can only pick one, and it's got to be a consensus. We've gone through these. We've got personal memories for each album. We've got signed vinyls that enhance that personal memory. But if we're going to pick one album to submit into our Friday Vinyl Club, which one are you choosing?
Well, should we do a 3, 2, 1 and see if we both come up with the same album?
We can do a 3, 2, 1 and see if we come up with the same album. I'll be intrigued to see which one you go for. So you ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Not Waving But Drowning. Oh, wow. Well, yeah, but again, that's our personal connection to that album. And I think, it came at a poignant time in our lives, as we said earlier, with you being at uni. And I think, we can listen to that album wherever we are, and we're transported back to that beautiful time. It intersects with us seeing Ben for the first time, and really kickstarting our journey, even though we'd been listening to Yesterday's Gone before. So if we were introducing Ben to a family or friend, and we were asking them to listen to a couple of bits of his music for the first time, hoping that they might connect, is there any particular song across the back catalogue, so not necessarily from that album, but is there anything that you would think that you could pull out?
I think for individual songs, I would maybe go for Ice Water or Florence. Those are really great songs to get a feel for his lyrics and his style. But I also think, in light of, I guess, the goal with this show that you started, pick one of his albums and maybe just try listen to it all the way through, front to back. There's so many interesting and unique things that he does on an album that a lot of artists don't do, whether it be ending a track with a conversation he's had with a taxi driver or his dad, or going from a song that gets you moving to a poem with a bit of a track in the background. So I think listening to an album full, front to back, just giving it a go, I think that's what we should try and encourage here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we've talked previously about listening to an album intentionally as the artist has put it together. And I think intentional listening is something that we want to encourage through this podcast. So, one final question, son.
Yeah.
If Ben, by chance, ever heard this episode, what would be our message to Ben? And it's a long shot, let's be honest. But if he ever found us, what's the little message that we would put at the end of this chat for Ben?
Well, I think your little message would be thank you for the amazing music. Please come on the podcast and come do an episode with my dad.
Potentially, but my message would be thank you, Ben, for everything, for the kindness that you've given us over the years. You've really underpinned our papa-son relationship with the music. You're a large part of our musical landscape, and we thank you for everything that you do. All the best with this new album. You don't need it from us. It's doing phenomenally well, and we can't wait to see what comes next. So yeah, thank you, Ben, is the big takeaway. But if you do want to come to the podcast, then give us a shout. Ollie, thank you so much for shining a light on the work of Loyle Carner. It was always and is an absolute pleasure chatting with you. It's always amazing to hear how music becomes part of our lives, not just in the sound, but in the memories it holds. To our listeners, you can find the albums we've talked about and a few of the tracks we've chatted about on our companion playlist, the Friday Vinyl Club Spotify playlist. The link's in the notes. And if you want to contact us, please feel free. We're on Instagram at JamieB1973. You can email me at jamieben1973@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend or leave a comment. It helps others to find the show. But until next time, keep your records spinning, keep your stories alive. This has been the Friday Vinyl Club Artist Spotlight on Loyle Carner, where every day feels like a Friday and every album tells a story. Keep listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, all.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye, guys.